Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar, An Ounce of Prevention. We are glad that you're here and thank you for choosing to spend some time with us today. Before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to explain the format of today's webinar. Attendees are muted. You can enter comments or questions into the chat box. If you would like to ask our presenter a question, please type it in the Q&A box at the bottom of your window. We will go through all questions for the presenter at the end of the presentation today. At the close of the presentation, you will be asked to complete a very brief questionnaire, and your feedback is very valuable to us here at Naspo. Today's presentation is good for one UPPCC contact hour. To get your certificate, simply complete the questionnaire following the presentation, and your certificate will be emailed to you. And in case you haven't heard, y'all, it's a new year, so why not capitalize on your Naspo membership this year by checking out all of the great resources that Naspo provides at naspo.org. Catch up on our blog, Naspo Pulse, for the latest articles and podcast episodes. Or have you registered for our next webinar? It's on March 11th, and it's about cybersecurity and procurement. You can register for that today at naspo.org. But for our presenter today is Miss Jennifer Pratt, who has been with the Ohio Attorney General's office since 1995 and has been the chief of the Antitrust section since 2003. She has participated in a wide array of major investigations and litigated matters, from the chlorine bid rigging litigation to investigations of alleged anti-competitive activities in professional sports, food additives, and the insurance industries. She led the litigation teams for the Ohio Attorney General's office in the Columbia HCA Blue Cross merger litigation and the Marion Hospital merger litigation and the Sorbates price fixing litigation. Jennifer has authored amicus briefs filed in the Ohio Supreme Court and on behalf of multiple states in the U.S. Court of Appeals for the 2nd, 9th, and 11th circuits. She is a frequent speaker and author of publications on antitrust law, and since 2003 has served as the amicus vice chair for the National Association of Attorney General's Antitrust Task Force. And before joining the Attorney General's office, Jennifer was in private practice. And with that, I turn it over to you, Jennifer.
Thank you so much, Lori. Really appreciate the opportunity to be here and speak to you today on a topic that is near and dear to my heart. That is competition and how to keep it working in public procurement. The materials that we distributed in advance, the promotional materials for this, said that I was going to be joined by my principal investigator, Bob Morgan. He had a personal conflict that prevented him from being here. So unfortunately, you'll have to listen to me for the whole hour. But I know his war stories, and I think I'll be able to tell them, not as well as he will, but I'll do my best. So in any event, as I said, this is a really important topic. And with respect to my job as an antitrust enforcer, I can tell you that what I focus on mainly is detection of anti-competitive activity by vendors, the encouraging and educating public purchasers on how to report anti-competitive activity, and also the prosecution of wrongdoing by vendors when we do indeed find it. So detecting and reporting bid rigging on public projects, well, that can really yield some incredible benefits for you and for the taxpayers you serve, because we can recover money that you were overcharged by unscrupulous vendors. And we have an entire presentation all about the red flags of collusion and how to detect them in great detail. But what we want to talk about today is something more, something that precedes the detection of anti-competitive activity. And that goes back to the old Ben Franklin quote, "An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure." So to give you kind of what may be a little bit of a silly example, but I think it makes the point. So which would you consider to be better? if you get hit by a bus and you have the best team of doctors in the whole world, and you're at the greatest hospital in the whole world, or to remain healthy and never get hit by the bus. Well, as I said, a little bit of a silly example, but it makes the point that we cannot ignore the things that you can do proactively to make sure that your process is secured and to set up your process to discourage that kind of behavior from happening in the first place. So a little bit of proactivity and planning on your part with respect to setting up your procurement process before you even have a product or a service in mind that you want to procure can do a couple of things. Number one, it can either prevent collusion, or it can lessen the likelihood of vendor collusion. And it can also make collusion easier to detect and report if it does indeed happen. So those two things are really, really both very important and can yield a lot of value for you. So what can you as a purchaser do to be proactive in this regard? So I want to go through a kind of a checklist of certain procedures, policies, certain activities that you can engage in on the front end. As I said before, you even have that first procurement put out there. What can you do to set up your process to discourage this kind of behavior and stimulate as much competition as you possibly can? Well, the first item on the checklist is to know what vendors can do and what they can't do under the antitrust laws. Because certainly, if I'm going to tell you to watch for violations of the law and to report violations, I can't very well do that unless I have allowed you to learn what is and isn't illegal under the antitrust law. So that's really important to be familiar with that. So there are, at a high level, there are two broad categories of business behavior that violate the federal and the state antitrust laws. One is unilateral monopolistic behavior, and the other is collusive behavior. We'll spend most of our time talking about the second one. But the unilateral or monopolistic behavior is behavior by a single firm, a single company, and those red words right there that you see, that's the key here. In order for a single firm to violate the antitrust laws, it must have market power. So if you are in a town, let's say with, think of all the fast food restaurants in your town. And let's say there's a McDonald's among them. If McDonald's raises the price of a milkshake to $10, what are you going to do? You're going to go someplace else to get a milkshake, I'm sure, because McDonald's doesn't have market power. There are plenty of Burger Kings and Wendy's and all kinds of other restaurants in town that you can switch to, that you can choose from. So McDonald's does not have market power. An example of a firm that did, however, is Microsoft. Back in the late 90s and early 2000s, we joined with other states and the US Department of Justice to bring a case against Microsoft, alleging that Microsoft had abused its monopoly power in the market for computer operating systems. And what we found through our investigation was that Microsoft had told manufacturers of laptops and desktops, if you put any other operating system besides Windows in a single piece of equipment, we'll never give you Windows again. Well, what do you think they did? Of course, they would not patronize any other competitors of Microsoft, and Microsoft secured its monopoly in that system and was found liable for misusing that market power. But now let's turn to kind of the center ring of today's presentation. That's collusive behavior. That's what will affect you the most. So collusive behavior involves agreements among competing vendors, either not to compete at all with each other or to restrict the terms of competition under which they will compete, to basically agree on either price or factors affecting price. So, and we'll talk in detail in a few moments about what that means. But the biggest examples that you're going to find: bid rigging, probably number one; price fixing, which is bid rigging without the competitive solicitation element; market allocation, either dividing up the market by customer or by geography. Those are examples of collusive behavior. So let's tear that apart. Let's tear that definition apart and take it piece by piece. So first of all, the agreement has to be among competitors. So who are competitors? That sounds like an incredibly easy, simplistic question. Not so much. We actually spend a great deal of time litigating the issue of whether one firm is competing with another. So competitors are businesses that offer the same or a similar product or service in the same geographic area. And it's important to remember that geography varies as to what is the relevant geographic area based on what the product is. Think about your search for a dentist. Would you, and let's assume you don't live in Oregon, or this would be a bad example, but I live in Ohio. I would not consider looking for a dentist in Oregon. However, if I needed brain surgery and the best brain surgeon in the country was in Oregon, do you think I would travel to Oregon? You better believe I would. So that's an example of how geographic market can differ based upon the product or service that you're talking about. So in another way to put this whole who is a competitor question, think of it this way. Businesses compete with each other if customers can feasibly and would feasibly choose between them when buying a particular product or service. So here's an example. Let's say in a given town, the Chamber of Commerce has a small business week. And small business week, they have a meeting of the businesses, and they say, we would like to really promote our town and our businesses. So we would like you all to issue a 25% discount for purchases made at your locations during this week. And so there are 3 particular businesses that are sitting in the same row in the back of the room: a beauty shop, a landscaper, and a restaurant. And the owners of those 3 businesses talk to each other after the meeting, and they say, are you going to do this 25% discount? Well, I'm thinking about it. Are you? So at the end of the conversation, they all say, yes, we agree. We'll all do the 25% discount. So as I said, an antitrust violation happens when there's an agreement on price or factors affecting price. So my goodness, that is an agreement on price, isn't it? Well, the question is, are they competitors? Well, no, they don't sell or appear to sell the same products or services. I suppose there could be a landscaper that does hair, but let's set that aside. I don't think that's very likely. So they do not compete with each other because they don't sell the same product or service. Here's another example talking about the geography piece of it. For anybody who's been to the state of Texas and traveled, especially by car through Texas, you know Texas is one big state. It's big north to south, it's big east to west, it's just big. So let's say we have ice cream shops. There's one in Houston, one in Dallas, one in San Antonio, and one in El Paso, all independently owned. And for some reason, never mind why, it doesn't matter, they all talk to each other and they say, let's all agree to set the price of a single scoop ice cream cone at $1. And all 4 of them say, yep, we'll do it, it's $1. Is that a violation of the antitrust laws? Clearly, they are agreeing on price, absolutely, and clearly, they are selling the exact same product. Are they competitors? Well, let's look at the geography piece of it here. No, they do not vie for the same customers. No one is going to drive from Houston to El Paso, or even from Houston to San Antonio or Dallas, to get an ice cream cone, especially as hot as it is usually in Texas. So those are not competitors. So you have to look both at the product or service and at the geography. Now, caution here, make sure that you don't ignore agreements with a potential competitor. Let's say you have a business in a given town. There is another business thinking about opening up that does the exact same service or product, thinking about opening up in that area, and they agree with each other to stay out of each other's turf. That is just as much of an antitrust violation as if they were both existing businesses in the town. So let's go to the next piece of the definition of an antitrust violation. What is an agreement? Again, sounds simple, but this is even more subject to our debates and litigation. An agreement can be a stated or overt agreement, shaking hands, exchanging emails, exchanging text messages, the spoken word, having a meeting. Those are all stated or overt agreements, and that's a slam dunk. Absolutely, that qualifies. But the trickier part is that an agreement can violate the antitrust laws if it is an understanding or a conscious commitment to behave in a similar manner, to, let's say, follow each other's prices. If there is an understanding between the two of them that wink and a nod, we agree, but they don't actually say the words, that's still a violation. So with that in mind, here's where it gets really tricky. Is it illegal for a vendor who has been in the business for a lot of years and knows its competitors? Maybe the competitors have been in business for a lot of years too. And those vendors can anticipate each other's pricing moves. They know when they raise prices. They know by about how much, under what conditions they raise prices. Is it illegal for those vendors to follow each other's pricing moves when they can anticipate those pricing moves from their past experience? And the answer to that is no. We call that conscious parallelism. There's no agreement there. And if there is no agreement or understanding, there's no violation. Here's the best example I can give you, and this is something that I hear about all the time: gas prices. In the retail gasoline market, we are constantly getting complaints from constituents who say, we've got gas stations on at the same intersection, and when one of them raises their price, the other one raises price minutes later. You can't tell me that's not collusion. You can't tell me they don't have a price fixing agreement. Well, here's the issue though. How does a gas station announce its price change to the world? Well, it puts it on this gigantic digital lighted sign right out by the road. All the competitor has to do is look out the window and see the price change, and that competitor can change its price too. If that's exactly what happened, if those decisions are independent and there's no understanding or communication, it's not a violation. But let me tell you this: if you can give any evidence that there actually was communication, or they actually did have an understanding to follow each other's price changes, you would be the most popular person to any antitrust enforcer that you reported it to. So please be sure to report that if you do have that kind of evidence. So the final piece of this is, what is an agreement on price or factors affecting price? Because the subject of the agreement has to be that kind of terms of sale or pricing agreement in order for it to be a violation. So let me give you a host of examples, because there are a lot of variations. Agreeing to raise price by a certain amount, to not have sales, to not accept coupons or to not double coupons, to charge the same delivery fee, increasing prices by a percentage. All of those per se violations of the antitrust laws. There is no excuse for those. The courts will not entertain any excuses. They're just illegal. So here's an example. Bookstores in a college town that agree that student discounts won't apply to medical textbooks in any of their respective stores. Yes, that is definitely a violation of the law. That was a case in 2004, and one of the bookstore executives pled guilty to a federal felony antitrust violation for behaving in that kind of activity. So you can also have agreements that violate the antitrust laws if they deal with supply, because factors affecting on price or affecting price include anything regarding supply and demand, because supply and demand is what sets price in the marketplace. So agreements to not produce a certain amount of volume, or to agree how much they're going to produce, or to not offer appointments at particular times of the week or particular times of the day, that's cutting back on your supply of service. Agreeing on Black Friday opening time, that would be a violation of the antitrust laws. Not doing service calls in the evenings. Also, anything regarding the terms of sale, offering the same credit terms, eliminating no money down offers, and agreeing to pay the same wages to your employees. That affects your price because it affects your cost structure. If you're suppressing the wages of your employees and your competitors doing the same, you're impacting price in that market, not to mention the price of wages, the price of labor in that market. So here's an example. 2 hospitals in town agreed to pay their nurses the same wages. Well, this happened in 2015. It was not 2 hospitals, it was 7. Those hospitals were in Southeast Michigan, and for the pleasure of engaging in that little agreement, they ended up paying $48 million to settle that antitrust conspiracy violation. So you can also have agreements with competitors that violate the antitrust laws where they agree to restrict their advertising. If they're not going to solicit each other's accounts or advertise only in their own side of the county, or not go after customers unless they are the incumbent ones, the ones that they had last year. All of those are blatant violations of the antitrust laws, such as the conspiracy between packaged ice companies that agreed on who would get which states, and then the states that you didn't have, you pulled out of because they belonged to your competitor. That is absolutely a blatant violation. That was a 2008 antitrust case, and the companies involved each of them paid a $9 million fine, and there were tens of millions of private settlements that followed even after the fines. Boycott types of agreements can also violate the antitrust laws. Competitors getting together to agree to put pressure on a supplier regarding price, or not to sell to a particular competitor, is a violation. And also boycotts of you, the purchaser, refusing to do business with a customer unless the customer agrees to terms that the vendors jointly agree that they want. And this happened in Connecticut with local snowplowing companies who got together and said, you know, these towns are allowing, or the city is allowing companies outside the city to bid on its work, and we don't want to share the work with them. So let's refuse to do business with them unless they stop allowing outside companies to bid. This was in 2013, and each of those 3 plowing companies had to pay $30,000 and refund to the city the overcharges. Also, direct mail solicitations, refusals to do that within a certain radius, keeping billboards on on your own side of the county, any kind of advertising restrictions, such as a case in which hospitals agreed not to put billboards in each other's home counties. That happened in West Virginia in 2016, and the two hospitals entered into a settlement and agreed that they would never do that again, and had to implement some antitrust compliance programs as a result. So bottom line on is that competitor agreements that are on price or terms directly impacting either supply or price or both are per se illegal. No excuses for them. The courts will not put up with them. So now that you have educated yourself on what vendors can and cannot do, educate yourself about the market, about the product market and the service market and the vendors that are in that market. There are certain conditions that you should be aware of that are favorable to collusion, such as collusion is more likely to occur when the group of available vendors who are available and able and qualified to bid on your job is small and stable. There is nothing that ruins a good conspiracy for conspirators enough as when a new entrant comes into the market. Because if you got these figures here shown in gold holding hands and they've all agreed on this illegal conspiracy, and then you have another entrant to the market, how do they know that that vendor is going to play ball? How do they know that vendor is not going to report them to the authorities? They don't. So in markets where there is a lot of entry and exit into the market, that discourages collusion. By the same token, make a note in your file or in your brain, if the market is really, really stable and has a very small number of the same bidders year after year after year, that is one that is hospitable to collusion. Collusion is more likely to occur when the products are standardized with not a lot of differences between the products themselves, and thus the vendors compete mostly on price. Now, let me explain that by giving you an example of a non-homogeneous product, something that is not at all standardized, commercial grade carpet. So let's say that you're going to put carpet in a school building or an office building. And so what are the factors that you're going to look at in deciding which bid you're going to accept? Well, you can look at color of the carpet. You can look at pattern, durability. Some of those carpets have the new carpet smell that doesn't dissipate for a while. You might not want that. Stain resistance. If you're buying for a school, certainly durability and stain resistance are going to be really, really important. So how can conspirators control who you're going to select? You know, they may have this allocation agreement that says that vendor A is going to win your business, but maybe vendor A isn't the best on durability and stain resistance for your school project. Thus, they have no idea, even if vendor A is supposed to win, you may choose vendor B because of these other factors. So let's look on the flip side at a very homogeneous product, school milk. Conspirators indeed can control the outcome here because milk is virtually identical no matter whose carton it comes in. It's milk. So conspirators can be pretty darn sure that schools are going to go with the most reasonable price. Now, certainly there are factors such as reliability and service and that kind of thing, but for the most part, they can be pretty sure that you're going to go with the lowest price. So as long as they fix who appears to have the best price, they can control who you choose. Collusion is also a lot more likely when there are not a lot of other products that can be substituted for that product. So I'm not talking about not a lot of other vendors to choose from, but switching to an entirely different product. So let's look again at the school milk example. So if the prices of milk, because of a collusive agreement, go through the roof, milk is suddenly hideously expensive, Could a school switch? Could it start serving Coke and Pepsi to the kids at lunch? What about coffee? What about iced tea? Well, any of you who are parents, I want you to think about how you would react if your school board decided to hop your kids up on caffeine and send them home every night. I think you would not be putting up with that. So that's what we call inelastic demand. When demand is inelastic, when you really have to purchase that particular type of product, sellers can be very confident that you're just going to have to put up with the increased prices that come from collusive agreements rather than switching to another product. Collusion is also more likely, and you should make a note of these things in your file and in your brain, when there are frequent and repetitive bids for the same particular good or service. And basically, if you put out for bid at the same number of times and the same times of year for the same service or product, vendors become familiar with who the bidders are, when you're going to put it out for bid, maybe even the engineer's estimate. They're going to perhaps be able to predict what the bid specs are. This makes it really easy for vendors to divide up future contracts in advance. Collusion is a lot more likely when competitors know each other through social engagements. If they go to football games together, let's say they go to restaurants frequently together, they have active trade associations, or there are employees that go back and forth between a few of the businesses in town. All of those things make collusion more likely. Now, I want to make clear that it is not illegal to be friendly to your competitor. There's nothing at all wrong with that. But what it does is it provides opportunity. And all of these, with respect to all of these things, none of these independently are definitely signs of collusion, and none of them are illegal. But what they do is they provide a setting in which collusion can more easily grow. So you should remember to be more on the lookout for it. Collusion is also more likely when bidders come physically to the same building or physically to the same town to submit their bids. Puts them in the same place at the same time, they can more easily form agreements, collusive agreements. So I strongly encourage electronic bidding whenever possible, because that minimizes at least that opportunity. You should educate yourself about the market in terms of vendors' costs and prices. So stay informed about surpluses and shortages in the raw materials that go into the products that you're buying. For example, if you know that a particular product has a given chemical as a component part of it, and you see that there is a surplus in the market, you see maybe in the newspaper, there's a surplus of that chemical, you should anticipate that your price might stay the same or even go down. If you see your price skyrocket, that should be something you should make note of, because it's doing the opposite of what the market would say is to be expected. Also, stay informed about prices that other agencies are paying and price trends in other states, because if you find that a similar city or a similar agency in your town is, or in your state, is paying a lot different price than you're paying, it might mean that one of those markets is rigged. So it could be a lot of other things, especially if they're in other states. There could be regulatory reasons for the price to be different, but just something to be aware of. Our next checklist item is to structure your bid process to encourage the good bidders and discourage the bad ones. Make sure they have enough time to prepare their bids. Make sure that you don't increase unknowingly the cost of preparing the bids. And the way that you can keep those costs for your vendors low is not changing the bid forms unless there's a good reason. Sometimes you really need to put something else in your bid form, but don't change it just because you're in the mood for a new font. Don't require information that you don't really need. And as I said before, use those electronic bidding systems. All of these things make submitting a bid more cost effective for the vendor, and that's what you want. Now, I'm going to, a number of times during this presentation, refer to consultants, and I want to give you a caveat right here up front. I am not at all saying that every consultant is bad or that you shouldn't use them. On the contrary, consultants can serve a really, really valuable purpose. They can allow you to have the benefit of their expertise that you may not have in-house, but a few bad apples may cause great problems. So if you're using a consultant, make sure that your agency personnel, both technical personnel and managerial personnel, participate in the process all the way through award. Just to keep an eye and make sure that you detect if you might have one of those bad apple consultants. The best way to do it would be to have the consultant give input on the specs and then have your in-house agency personnel take charge of the selection and the award. I realize full well you may not have the staff or the expertise in-house to do that. I'm just saying that would be optimal from an antitrust standpoint, from a competition advocacy standpoint. When you're evaluating non-price factors, make sure you decide on the weights for those factors in advance, especially when you're using a consultant, because the non-price factors are the easiest way for a consultant who might have a side agreement with a vendor to steer the business his way. That's the easiest way for that consultant to say, oh, well, I realize that vendor A has not got the best price, but vendor A's reputation is spectacular and you really need to go with vendor A. So you need to decide in advance on how much weight each of those kind of factors will get. Here's one that is a particular favorite of mine, and if you look in the material, the supplemental materials that either have been or will be distributed to you, there's a sample assignment clauses for your vendor contracts. But I wanted to talk to you a little bit about them just to put it in your mind, and maybe it's something that you might want to talk to your legal counsel about as to whether it would be right for you. So before I tell you what assignment clauses are, let me tell you why they're needed. In 1977, there was a US Supreme Court case called Illinois Brick versus Illinois. And in that case, it dealt with price fixing of bricks by a brick manufacturer. The brick manufacturer fixed the prices with its competitors, sold the overpriced bricks to a distributor who sold them to a contractor who put the bricks into houses and sold the houses to homeowners. The homeowners found out about the price fixing and sued the manufacturer who fixed the prices. And the court said, no, sorry, you're out of luck, homeowners. Because you didn't deal directly with the wrongdoer, we can't figure out whether 100% of the price increase was passed all the way through that chain to you, or 50% or 30 or 25. We have no idea, so you just can't recover. So you, as a public purchaser, are going to be in that situation often, not always. Sometimes you will be dealing directly with the wrongdoer. But in cases where you're dealing with somebody more distant in the chain of distribution to you, an assignment clause will transfer the vendor who you do direct business with, their antitrust claims to you. So you could sue the original antitrust violator, the manufacturer, or whoever it was that violated the laws. So as I said, I have a sample of language in the materials, and please, I encourage you to talk to your legal counsel about whether that might be right for you. So the next checklist item is to foster a larger bidder pool. Make sure you do everything you possibly can to keep that potential bidder list up to date. Put as many potential bidders on it as you can to notify them about your jobs, because collusive agreements are greatly discouraged and much harder to reach and implement and enforce and keep going the more and more bidders are in the market. It just becomes cumbersome if there are lots of bidders bidding on your jobs. Make sure you don't disqualify bidders if they don't bid on your job on a particular year. Keep them on the list. You want to keep inviting as everyone you possibly can. Invite them through as many ways as you possibly can. These days, there's publication, there's internet sites that do that for you, email, all kinds of ways. Use as many methods as you possibly can to try to drum up a lot of competition. But word of caution, if you use any direct methods, such as email or mail, regular mail, make sure you do that as consistently and fairly as possible to avoid being accused of favoritism by vendors, because nobody wants to deal with that kind of an accusation. The next item on the checklist is to think very carefully about your bid specs. Certainly, your need for quality and safety and efficiency have to be paramount in your mind, but don't let that completely override your desire to get competitive prices and to get the benefit of competition. So make your bid specs very clear and concise, but not overly restrictive so as to squeeze some potential competitors out of the running for your jobs. Don't make the bid specs tailored to a particular product or a particular vendor or supplier because you hope to get that one. You may be correct that that may end up being the best vendor, but why exclude competition and not give them a chance to show you what they've got? You want to give them at least an opportunity to bid. Don't copy bid specs from manufacturers' literature, from websites. Don't use brand names. You can use brand names if you put in or equivalent, but otherwise you're just kind of predestinating the one particular brand, and you're going to greatly reduce the benefits that you get from competition. So when you're doing those bid specs, your focus should always be on functional performance, what you want this product or service to do for you, not the details and specifics of how the goal is to be achieved or who is going to achieve that goal. When you allow alternative sources of supply, this encourages business and vendors out there to be innovative, to try to bring you their best and bring you something maybe you hadn't even thought of. And it makes collusion a whole lot more difficult the more vendors you have in the process. Again, let me go back to the bad apple consultant, not the good consultants, but the bad ones. In order to do that, in order to watch for those, if you have any consultant draft the specs, make sure you review them to guard against bid tailoring schemes, which is where a consultant agrees with a vendor to tailor the bid to steer it directly to them. Watch out for those things and put the stop at them before they get too far. When you get your process in place, like we've talked, you structure your process to discourage anti-competitive activity. Then make sure you hold the vendor's feet to the fire. Require compliance with everything you've put into place. Require those vendors to do things as submitting non-collusion affidavits and making sure the vendor questionnaire is complete and meeting all the conditions imposed by the state. What you do by allowing some vendor to not satisfy all conditions imposed by the state is to give a competitive edge, a cost advantage to those who are not complying, because it's expensive to comply. It's expensive to get your licensure, and you don't want to give a cost advantage to those who are not doing that. Ask your vendors in the bid process to identify their subs, their suppliers, anyone they're in a joint venture with, their partners. Ask them to execute the affidavit of non-collusion. This is certainly in everybody's line of vision. I'm sure you all have that in your process. Make sure you require them to execute it. Non-collusion affidavits can both educate vendors, because believe it or not, not all of them know that collusion is illegal. And it can also deter violations. It is really shocking to me to think about, but it is indeed true. I have found in antitrust enforcement that vendors that know that collusion is illegal are willing to do it. But when you put an affidavit in front of them, they know that they're more afraid of fraudulently executing documents, perjury, those kind of criminal violations than they are about a criminal antitrust violation. So whatever it takes to discourage them, let's discourage them. So the next item on the checklist is to do your homework. By that, I mean things such as if a consultant recommends a sole source procurement, make sure they have good reason to do so. Push back and ask them why they're recommending that. You know, sole source there are places for it. Sometimes you have to go sole source, but it's obviously not ideal, and make sure that you push back on that consultant's recommendation. Check with other agencies in your area or other similar agencies in other states maybe, to determine whether a particular vendor that you know they've dealt with is reliable and responsible. Again, allowing unreliable or not responsible vendors to win is giving a cost advantage to those who try to do everything by the book and try to do a good job. They'll just stop bidding on your job if the unreliable bidders keep winning. Make sure that you review all materials that you collect, such as those non-collusion affidavits and the questionnaire. Even though it seems routine, look at them. And if there are questionable answers, if there are answers that seem weird, if there are answers that are incomplete, push back and follow up on them. They could be very important. Do a little research if you have time, and I realize that everybody is strapped for resources and more minutes in the day, but if you have time, do a little bit of basic research on vendors. You might find that the vendor has been indicted for a crime. You might even find they've been indicted for price fixing. Look at Google, Angie's List, Facebook, the Better Business Bureau. There are all kinds of different ways to do a little basic research on your vendors. Make sure your bidders are real companies, not companies that are just created or mocked up to make you think there are multiple bidders. And develop a related companies list. Companies that are run by relatives, actual family members of each other, or companies that are parents and subs of each other from a corporate standpoint. And let me give you a case study to talk about why that's important. Several years ago, we dealt with a case in which there was a family. The father was Robert and his sons Matthew and James, and they ran an asphalt paving company in a small town in Northeast Ohio. We'll call it REM Asphalt. The names have been changed to protect the guilty. Robert started bringing his sons early on into the business, teaching them the business with the thought of turning it over to them one day. Well, one day came fairly soon. Robert became old and wanted to retire to Florida. And so he turned the business over to his sons. Well, his sons decided they were going to split up the assets and they were each going to have their own company. So they went and formed separate independent companies. Or were they independent? Well, James kept the REM Asphalt name, and Matthew opened what we'll call MKM Construction. And they started going head to head, bidding on jobs and competing with each other. Or so it seemed. But the truth is, they were using the exact same employees, the exact same equipment. Their trucks On one day, the truck would be at a job with REM asphalt emblazoned on the side. And the next day, they would put a giant magnet over it that said MKM Construction. So there really weren't two businesses, there were just one. They were trying to make the cities and counties and townships in the area think that they were getting multiple bids so that they wouldn't try harder to drum up additional business. And by doing so, they were making money hand over fist, so much so that when we and the feds raided one of their houses, there was in the garage, at least there was a Lamborghini, a Ferrari, and a Lincoln Navigator. So yes, collusion does pay if it is not detected. So other things you can do to protect yourself in the future, set up a database. Just a simple Excel spreadsheet will work. House all your current and future bid results, put in the bidders, who they are, what they bid, and who won. And the reason for this is because there are some patterns that become more apparent when multiple bid results are viewed together, either multiple years or multiple bidders in the same year in different geographic locations or with different cities or townships. So here's an example, and I want you to get your chat box ready because I would like you to take a look at this and type in the chat box anything that you see that looks interesting over these 3 years of winners. Now, each of the winners, like you'll see Cox is in green, Superior is shown in red, so you can easily see where they're winning in 3 years. So what is the pattern? Go ahead and type that in the chat box, and I'll have Lori let me know what you're seeing.
Hey, Jennifer, it looks like I'm seeing rotating awards from Kylie Carter, Crystal Bailey saying they are rotating winning bids. Anna Cox is saying they all alternate the years, alternating in specific order, coming in from Michael, taking turns coming in from Connie, ABC coming in from Janet. Does it sound like we're on the right,
You guys
kind
are
of
good.
pattern here?
You guys are good. Yes. See, they are rotating. We call that bid rotation. And that is a common scheme that is not easy to detect unless you put that in an Excel spreadsheet or graph it or somehow chart it out. Really hard to detect otherwise. So here's another one. This is a little bit more tricky. Again, take a look at these bid results and type in the chat box if you see anything odd about the patterns here. Now these are bids put out by a single city or a single county. And these are the 4 bidders that bid over a 3-year period.
Okay, let's see here. Jennifer, it looks like Kelly thinks they still are alternating years. It looks like Shirley says one goes high, then low, then high, then low. So they're alternating pricing. Carla's saying they're taking turns. Crystal says they're still rotating. Are we on the right track here?
You are. This is just another kind of another form of rotation. If you notice, these companies have teamed up. Alpha and Gamma go together, and Beta and Delta go together. And so in the first year, Alpha and Gamma, Alpha gets to be the low bidder. Gamma then withdraws and ends up as the sub for Alpha. And then Beta and Delta are high, not even close to winning. Then you move to 2015 and Beta and Delta are low bidder and withdraw and become the sub, and Alpha and Gamma are then high, not even a chance of winning, and it continues. So when you have situations like this, sham bids and suspicious prime sub relationships, suspicious withdrawals, those kind of things can show up in your database because they're patterns that you wouldn't see unless you just chart it out like this. So building a database like this, also helpful in other ways too, helps me and my colleagues who are antitrust enforcers in investigating, and it helps you report. It just tells you when to report, and it makes it easier for you to report because you've got something you can just hand over. Things not to do, don't volunteer your list of who picked up packets or who received invitations to bid. You must comply with public records laws. I absolutely want to make that clear. Sometimes you have to give those things out, and if you do, understandable, but don't offer that as a matter of course. So what you need to do is make sure you know your state's public records law, know whether it requires disclosure of bid materials prior to the contract award. We here in Ohio recently got a statutory change where we no longer require that until the bid is awarded. And I think that's a great thing for competition. A couple of other tips: don't use contract extensions that would allow a contract to just keep rolling over and over and over after the contract term expires without more competitive bidding. Same, very similar concept, don't use open-ended contracts that don't have a definite end date or a time frame for the life of the contract. Don't use lump sum bids if you can get line item bids. Frequently, it is much easier for a collusive vendor or vendors to hide within a lump sum bid their price increase, as opposed to if it's line item, you can easily pick out where each of the bidders are on a particular item. You can narrow right in on where that cost difference is. Don't disclose the engineer's estimate unless you're required to prior to the award of the job. All of those types of things give a kind of a roadmap to collusion. Don't break the contract down into smaller amounts unless absolutely necessary. You don't want to circumvent the competitive process unless. And when I say breaking the contract down to smaller amounts, I'm talking about to avoid the requirement of competitive bidding. Don't do it just to avoid the time-consuming process. I realize it's time-consuming, but it really is an important process. And also set up your process so that post-award monitoring is a part of it. You'll want to look really closely at any consultant's award to non-low bidders. Certainly, I understand the benefit of an experienced bidder, and I understand the benefit of incumbency. Absolutely, that's valuable. But you need to be wary of schemes in which the consultant may be favoring a company for reasons other than its value, such as that they're on the take. Hate to bash the consultants again, but it's just something to watch for. Watch for numerous change orders or change orders that are very, very large in amount. This could be a deal that a consultant has that it will allow a low bid to escalate after the award by the consultant saying, don't worry, bid low, win the job, then I'll pass your change orders through. I'll make sure they get approved. So you want to watch out for something like that. Make competitive bidding the rule, not the exception. And the three most important final words I can leave you with are report, report, report. If you see anything that makes you go, that's odd, in your bid results, that is an alarm bell to you that you, in your experience as an experienced purchaser, you should trust your instincts that if it's weird, report it. I would much rather, as an antitrust enforcer, I would much rather have a report of something that doesn't end up being a real problem than to miss out on some wrongdoing and not be able to get you your money back. So how do you report? Either call or email your state attorney general's office. Every state has an attorney general's office, and every state has folks that do antitrust enforcement. Or you could also contact the U.S. Department of Justice's Citizen Complaint Center and lodge a complaint there. So there is enforcement by both the state, at the state and the federal level. So you can do either or both. And with that, I will open it up to questions and give you some time. I don't know, Lori, if we have any already in the chat, or if we'd like to give some time for people to add them.
Well, they can still add them, but it looks like we've already got a couple. So, and since we're right at our time, let me go ahead and give some closing remarks. So that way if people have to jump off, they can. And if not, they can stick around for the answer part too. So first, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today. I'd like to extend a huge thank you to Ms. Jennifer Pratt, our speaker today, as I believe this was an absolutely wonderful presentation. Jennifer, we cannot thank you enough. As a reminder, all attendees will receive within 24 hours an email from Naspo that contains a copy of the slide deck, some supplemental material that was prepared by Jennifer to go along with a copy of the slide deck. And don't forget, if you need your UPPCC contact hour, you have to complete that after webinar survey, and that certificate will be emailed to you within 24 hours. So if you have to hop off, guys, you're more than welcome to. And if not, we can start going through these questions, Jennifer, if that sounds good.
That sounds good.
All right, looks like I got the first one coming in. And it was from Ms. Shirley Smith, who was wanting to know, is it hard to determine collusion?
Oh, yes. Oh, my goodness, yes. And that is what makes presentations like this so important, why we focus on them so much. There are some things that just cannot be detected without us going and issuing subpoenas for the internal documents of the company. Sometimes only when you get a hold of their internal emails and text messages can you really see what was going on. So, and even then, sometimes it's tough. So yes, it's a big uphill climb.
Is bid rigging common? And if it is, do you see it in certain areas, for example, like construction, more heavily than others?
We do see it in some areas more heavily than others. Some of the frequent violators are paving. We see it a lot in chemicals. And I believe you mentioned the chlorine investigation we did. We also did an investigation about aluminum sulfate, water treatment chemicals, those types of things, and school milk. Dairy products seem to be one that comes up all the time. So those types of things are those homogeneous products that are very similar. There's not a lot of qualitative difference between the bidders. Yeah, all the time. We did a big case on rock salt just a few years ago and litigated that all the way through and got a large settlement on that one.
Yeah, I know. I remember from the presentation, you said those homogeneous products are ripe for, those are ripe collusion environments to be aware of. Now, is there data per state showing how many lawsuits filed against contractors or suppliers, or if there is, does it show who won or who lost the case? Is there a centralized kind of database like that you're aware of?
I don't know of one. I think that would be fantastic. There may be some states that are better at it than others. I know we don't have anything like that here in Ohio. So unfortunately, no, but that would be terrific.
So here, how do you report the antitrust? I'm sorry. So who do you report the antitrust violations to? For example, the bookstore or the hospital nurse wages examples that you went over in the presentation.
Mm-hmm. That would be either to your state attorney general's office or to the U.S. Department of Justice. Either way, for my state, we have on the antitrust section page, we have a little form that you can fill out, which are tips on collusion and bid rigging. And so you can you can even on our site, you can even do it anonymously. You know, if if you have a good relationship with your vendor and you don't want it known that you're the one that is telling, you can do it anonymously. So every state is going to be a little different, but I imagine if you went on the website and you just navigate to Antitrust, that's going to be the person that is going to want to hear what you have to say about those kind of observations.
I have another question that came in. Says, can you explain more about why it's not best to award based on total bid?
And I want to make sure, I don't know if we're talking about price or the lump sum point.
Sorry, y'all, didn't realize I was still muted. The question came from, it's a Zoom call, came from Catrice Hyde. So Catrice, if you hear this, if you would like to clarify for us in the chat box, I'll move along to the next question and we can circle back if that's okay. Jennifer, are you all right with that? Okay.
Absolutely.
Looks like we had the next question is from Janet. We'd like to know, is there a website for the same question above regarding lawsuit or vendor violations that can be referenced that when we do our due diligence in researching potential vendors? I guess, the main question is there any sort of database that says someone has been prosecuted for some sort of collusion before, or is there anything like that?
It's extremely frustrating for us because we would love there to be a centralized location for that kind of information, but there's not that I know of. Maybe some states do a better job of it than others, but I don't know of any kind of centralized database for that kind of thing. But I do know with the power of internet search engines, if you put in the name of a particular vendor, you will often find things like that coming up. You'll find court cases, and then if you find a reference to a court case, you can go to that particular court, check their docket, and you can see if there was a conviction or if there wasn't. So just start out really broadly. Start out with just a general internet search, and then if you see any inklings, if you see any newspaper reports that reported something like that or anything, then keep honing it down, and you might find reference to a particular court case or particular conviction.
It looks like Catrice got back with us, so I'm going to rephrase the question with a little bit more exact this time. So can you explain more about why it's not best to award based on lump sum total bid?
Right. What we have found is when we look at bid records, situations where you have a broken down a completely line item bid, and if you think about vendors who are sitting around a table hatching this evil plan to collude, they're going to have to be a lot more careful that they say, okay, let's all choose the drywall. Let's all say that drywall went up. We have to make sure that we put our price increase on the drywall line, or they're going to get really suspicious. It's one extra layer of communication and agreement that they have to go through in order to make sure that it doesn't set off alarm bells in your head. If it's just a lump sum, the whole construction project is just X dollars, that's easy. They'll just say, okay, who's going to win? Joe, you're going to win this one. What do you want to bid? Joe says $100,000. They say everybody else be higher than 100,000. Done and done. It's easy. Lump sum just makes it a little more tricky for them to collude, or rather, line item makes it more tricky for them to collude.
Right. And it looks like, let's see here, Matthew Chow had a question. What do you record in your database to help identify? And this is vendor name, price, what else?
What we would want would be, and you know, I want the moon as an antitrust enforcer. I want you to record everything you've ever seen or recognized. That's not realistic. I would want the company's name, probably the location of the company. I would want the bid that they submitted, probably the date on which they submitted it. Definitely if they changed their bid, withdrew their bid, anyone that withdrew their bid, make sure they go in there. Those kind of things would be really, really useful, because that's going to give you an idea of who may be making deals with whom. And I think that would be a good baseline of information.
Well, Jennifer, that was all of our questions today.
Okay.
I just want to say thank you again, and thank you to everyone for joining us. We really appreciate you. And please, please, please make sure to check out naspo.org for all of our great resources, and you can register for our next NASPO webinar, which is coming up March 11th. So go and register now. All right, Jennifer, thank you
so much.
Thank you so much for attending. Thank you everyone for coming, and everyone, let's finish the day strong. Bye.
Bye, everyone.